September 1st is coming. And in typical fashion, the man in the big White House ice and tea extending a hand, he's loading a shotgun and calling it negotiation. The threat is clear. A 35% tariff on every Canadian import unless Ottawa signs a deal he likes, not the deal that was already negotiated. Not the carefully crafted agreement hammered out over years of back and forth, a brand new deal, signed under pressure, before the buzzer. But here's where it gets interesting. Canada didn't beg, they didn't plead. They didn't fire off angry tweets. Instead, they did something far more powerful. They just smiled and started shipping elsewhere, because in diplomacy, silence is louder than a slap. So who really walked away from the table? The betrayal of USMCA extended. Canada had been here before. In the 1980s, it was softwood lumber. In the 1990s, it was wheat. Now in the 2020s, it's steel, autos, and energy. Every generation of Canadians learns the same brutal lesson. When Washington feels cornered, allies become targets. For decades, trade with the United States wasn't just business. It was lifeblood. Trucks crossed the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor every 2 minutes, carrying engines, milk, grain, even bolts of fabric, all flowing south. Meanwhile, American farmers and manufacturers shipped their goods north, feeding the shelves of Canadian stores. Billions moved daily, without a thought. The USMCA was supposed to lock that stability in place. Predictability, trust, security. But Trump's use of Section 232 shattered that trust. What was once a partnership began to feel like a hostage situation. Canada's exports weren't the only target. Workers were families in Hamilton's steel mills, Alberta's energy fields, and Ontario's auto plants suddenly woke up to a reality that Washington could flip their paychecks off like a light switch. The shock was immediate. Plants paused production. Small suppliers froze hiring. Prices on basic goods, everything from cars to refrigerators, started creeping upward. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn. Instead of folding, Canada played its cards. Carney and LeBlanc didn't rant on podiums. They didn't threaten blindly. They did something far sharper. Europe, Asia, Latin America, even Africa. Canada began opening doors that Washington thought were bolted shut. The European Union fast-tracked deals. Indonesia and the Philippines welcomed Canadian wheat. Ecuador and Chile courted Canadian miners. Japan and South Korea leaned in on auto partnerships. And suddenly, Canada's vulnerability was transforming into leverage, because while tariffs were hurting Canadian exports, they were also choking U.S. industries. Detroit auto plants were starved of Canadian parts. Construction companies faced soaring steel costs. Even us farmers were dragged into the mess when Canada retaliated with tariffs of its own. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce started sweating. Governors in Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin called Washington, demanding a rollback. "You're not punishing Canada," one governor said bluntly. "You're punishing us." But Trump didn't blink. He doubled down, knowing that chaos often fuels his political fire. And now the deadline looms. September 1st. If there's no new agreement, everything from cheese to oil to car parts could be hit with a 35% tariff wall. This isn't just another trade fight. It's a collision course between two neighbors tied together by geography, culture, and economics, now tearing at the seams. For Canada, it's about sovereignty, about proving that it won't kneel, no matter how heavy the hammer falls. For the US, it's about power, about showing that even allies must bend when Washington says so. 1 month, 1 clock, and 2 countries gambling with each other's future. History may one day call it the betrayal of USMCA, the pivot away from America. The numbers don't lie, they scream. For decades, Canada's economic bloodstream flowed straight into the United States. More than 3/4 of everything Canada produced, cars, oil, lumber, wheat, minerals, was destined for its southern neighbor. The two economies weren't just linked, they were fused. But between May 2024 and May 2025, something snapped. Exports to the US fell from 75.9% to 68.3% of Canada's total trade, a freefall not seen since the Great Depression. What looks like a few percentage points on paper is, in reality, billions of dollars shifting overnight. And behind those numbers is something even bigger, a psychological break. Nearly 29% of Canadian companies have already cut themselves loose from US trade entirely. Manufacturers that once lived and died by Detroit now ship their parts to Europe and Southeast Asia. Prairie wheat farmers are loading ships bound for Indonesia instead of Minnesota. Tech firms in Toronto and Vancouver are pitching software to Tokyo and Berlin, not Silicon Valley. Another 37% of Canadian businesses aren't walking away from America outright, but they're hedging their bets, sourcing raw materials from Latin America, negotiating supply deals with India, or tapping into Africa's emerging markets. This isn't chaos, it's choreography. Canada isn't retreating, it's repositioning. The USMCA still exists in black ink, but the trust that powered it has been erased. For Canadian CEOs, the message from Washington is clear. Trade with America at your own risk. A single stroke of a presidential pen can shut you out overnight. So Canada is writing a new playbook. One where survival doesn't depend on the whims of the Oval Office. one where trade flows east and west, not just south. This is not just a pivot, it's the start of an economic divorce. Canada's countermove, Bill C-5. Instead of panicking, Canada went on offense. In June 2025, Parliament passed Bill C-5, a sweeping piece of legislation designed to reboot the Canadian economy. It did three things: streamlined trade between provinces to eliminate bottlenecks, funded new infrastructure projects that would redirect supply chains, connected Arctic shipping routes into the global marketplace, bypassing U.S. pressure. And the symbolism didn't stop there. Ottawa appointed its first ever Arctic ambassador, Virginia Mers, an Inuit leader from Iqaluit. For the first time in Canadian history, the far north wasn't just a frontier, it was a geopolitical bargaining chip. The money followed. 6 billion Canadian dollars poured into clean energy grids, over-the-horizon radar, and new logistics corridors. Another $420 million CAD went straight into Indigenous-led surveillance and Arctic defense teams. This wasn't theater, it was strategy, because the Arctic isn't just frozen wilderness anymore. Beneath the ice lies a storehouse of lithium, cobalt, and rare earth minerals, the essential ingredients for electric vehicles, advanced electronics, and even future weapons. Canada's message to Washington was unmistakable: respect Indigenous sovereignty and fair trade, or don't expect access at all. America's shrinking influence, the numbers are real. The headlines are loud. But behind them, a quieter story is unfolding, one that Washington doesn't want to admit. Because while the White House is busy chasing cameras, stacking up photo ops in Tokyo, London, and Jakarta, something far more dangerous is happening right next door. Canada, America's closest ally, its largest trading partner, its oldest friend. For more than a century, the US and Canada stood shoulder to shoulder, military allies, economic partners, cultural kin. But in 2025, for the first time in living memory, Ottawa wasn't even in the room. This wasn't just an oversight. This wasn't just bad scheduling. It was a turning point. Instead of standing at Washington's side, Canada quietly turned north and east toward Denmark, Norway, and Greenland. Together, they began building something the US had long taken for granted: an Arctic alliance. At first glance, it may look symbolic, a handful of cold, sparsely populated nations working on cooperation. But beneath the ice, the stakes are enormous. Shipping lanes opening with climate change, vast energy reserves, rare earth minerals that power the technologies of tomorrow, and, most importantly, new defense networks in a region where Russia and China are already testing the boundaries. And yet America, the supposed Arctic power, was left out. This wasn't a snub. This was a statement. It said, "We don't trust you anymore." Because while Washington was slapping tariffs 25% in February, 50% by June, and the looming threat of 35% on every Canadian export by August, Canada was building bridges elsewhere, and every handshake Ottawa made overseas told the world the same thing: America's influence is no longer a guarantee. And that's the real loss. Not just dollars, not just shipments, not just contracts. It's trust. Once broken, it doesn't come back easily, and when your closest ally, the neighbor who shares the longest undefended border in the world with you, starts planning its future without you, that's when the real question must be asked. Is America still leading the table, or just flipping it whenever it feels cornered? Because tariffs can change prices, but tariffs can't buy loyalty. And when Canada quietly walks away, the US doesn't just lose a trade partner, it loses something far greater. The credibility that once made its handshake mean something. The tariff avalanche, meanwhile, America doubled down on pressure. February 2025, 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. March 2025, expanded 25% on general goods. June 2025, doubled again, 50% on metals. August 2025, the threat looms: 35% tariffs on everything. Washington calls it strength. Ottawa calls it punishment. But here's the truth: tariffs don't build partnerships, tariffs burn them. The bigger loss, trust, and this is where the wound cuts deepest. This fight isn't just about lumber, aluminum, or auto parts. It's about something money can't buy: trust. For decades, Canada believed in the handshake, that no matter the politics, no matter the storms, the US would honor its word. But in 2025, that promise feels broken. So when Canada joined Mexico in exploring a new regional trade pact without Washington, the world took notice. Not because of the economics, but because of the symbolism. America didn't just lose sales, it lost credibility. And once trust is gone, every ally starts writing a new playbook, one that no longer depends on Washington. The silent break: this is the reality no headline will capture. When Canada walks away in silence, it isn't just a missed shipment at the border. It's the quiet end of something bigger: a friendship, an alliance, a belief that the United States was still the steady hand at the table. Because tariffs can force price changes, but tariffs can't buy loyalty. Closing challenge: so as August 1st ticks closer, ask yourself, is America still leading the table, or just flipping it whenever it feels cornered? What do you think? Is this strategy making the United States stronger or lonelier? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because in our next deep dive, we'll uncover how this North American rift is reshaping global politics, from the Arctic to Asia.